The air in the Queen's lodging at the Tower of London was thick with the scent of fear and damp stone. It clung to Anne like a shroud woven from her own despair, each breath a struggle against the invisible weight pressing down upon her chest. Outside, the Thames lapped against the fortress walls with a ceaseless, monotonous murmur, a sound that, to her fevered mind, mimicked the relentless ticking of a clock counting down her final hours. She stood by the narrow, mullioned window, her once vibrant gowns now feeling like sackcloth against her skin, heavy and devoid of the silken rustle that had once announced her arrival in any court. The gray light of a bleak May morning filtered through the grimy panes, painting the familiar courtyard below in shades of perpetual twilight. Her gaze, once sharp and commanding, was now distant, haunted, fixed upon the cold, unyielding architecture of her prison. The very stones seemed to watch her, silent witnesses to a betrayal so profound it had shattered the foundations of her world. Just days ago she had been Queen of England, her every whim attended, her power seemingly unassailable. Now she was merely a prisoner, her title stripped, her future reduced to the terrifying uncertainty of a scaffold. The suddenness of it all had left her reeling, a ship dismasted in a sudden squall, cast adrift in a storm of malicious whispers and fabricated accusations. Treason, adultery, incest. The words, once so unthinkable, now echoed in the hollow chambers of her mind, a monstrous litany repeated by unseen tormentors. Her ladies, those who remained, moved about the chamber like startled birds, their whispers hushed, their eyes averted. They were shadows, reflections of her own diminished glory, fearing to meet her gaze lest they too be drawn into the abyss consuming her. Lady Kingston, the constable's wife, a woman whose face was a mask of dutiful impassivity, sat knitting by the meager fire, her needles clicking with unnerving regularity, each click a tiny hammer blow against Anne's fraying nerves. It was a sound that seemed to mock the frantic beating of her own heart. Anne longed for solitude, for a moment to simply unravel, to scream into the unyielding stone walls until her throat was raw, but even that small mercy was denied her. Eyes were always upon her, watching, listening, recording every sigh, every tremor of her hand, every murmured prayer. She closed her eyes, seeking refuge in the darkness behind her lids, but the images that flickered there were more terrifying than any waking reality. The king's face, once alight with an almost desperate devotion, now contorted into a mask of cold fury. His eyes, which had once promised eternal fealty, now held only judgment and a chilling, absolute severance. How could love so fiercely, given, so passionately returned, curdle into such venomous hatred? Had she truly become the monster they painted her to be? No, she knew, with a certainty that clawed at her soul, that she was innocent. Innocent of the grotesque charges. Innocent of the incest that twisted her stomach to knots. Innocent of the countless adulteries they claimed she had committed. Her only sin, she now understood with chilling clarity, was her failure to provide a male heir, a living, breathing testament to her worth as queen. That, and perhaps, the very audacity of her existence. A faint shudder ran through her slender frame. The cold seeped not only from the stones but from within her, an icy dread that chilled her to the very marrow. She remembered the day she was brought here, ushered through Traitor's Gate, the ignominious portal through which so many royal victims had passed. The stone archway had seemed to devour the last remnants of her freedom, spitting her out into a purgatory of her own making. She had wept then, a torrent of desperate tears collapsing into a heap on the cold flagstones, but her tears had dried, replaced by a bitter resolve. Now only a profound weariness remained. Her mind, usually so keen and quick, felt muddled, swathed in a fog of disbelief and exhaustion. She tried to reconstruct the events, to find the thread of logic in the madness, but it eluded her. One moment, she was at Greenwich, attending to the usual courtly rituals, overseeing her household. The next, she was being arrested. Her brother George, Lord Rochford, seized alongside her. Then, Sir Henry Norris, Mark Smeaton, Sir Francis Weston, William Brereton, all men who had been part of her inner circle, condemned with her, their fates inextricably bound to hers. The very names tasted like ash in her mouth. She knew they were innocent, pawns in a brutal game, sacrificed to secure her downfall. The weight of their impending doom pressed heavily upon her. If they were to die for her, what hope could there be for her own survival? The king, her Henry, had once been her protector, her champion. He had defied pope and emperor for her, torn England from the ancient embrace of Rome, and remade the very fabric of his kingdom to place a crown upon her head. And now that same hand which had once caressed her hair and held her close was poised to sign her death warrant. The irony was a cruel, twisted blade in her heart. He had elevated her beyond all reason, and now, with equal ruthless determination, he was casting her down into the deepest pit of ignominy. She turned from the window, her eyes sweeping over the sparsely furnished room. It was not a dungeon, no, but it was far from the opulent chambers she had known. The tapestries were faded, the furniture utilitarian, a stark contrast to the rich silks and velvets, the glittering jewels and golden chalices of her previous life. A small, unlit fire laid in the hearth, its cold ashes a symbol of her extinguished hope. Her hand instinctively went to her neck, tracing the line where the axe, or perhaps the sword, would fall. A shiver, not of cold, but of morbid fascination, ran through her. How would it feel? Quick, she hoped. Clean. But she had heard stories of botched executions, of prolonged agony. A gasp escaped her lips, quickly stifled. She must not show weakness. Not now, not ever. A guard's heavy footsteps echoed outside the door, followed by the clink of keys. Anne's heart leaped into her throat, a wild bird trapped in a cage. Was it time? Had they come for her already? The door creaked open, and a figure stood silhouetted against the dimmer light of the hallway. It was Lady Kingston again, her face, still impassive, but with a slight, almost imperceptible tension around her mouth. She carried a small, covered dish. "Your Majesty?" Lady Kingston's voice was flat, devoid of warmth or malice. "Your supper." Anne forced a faint, dismissive wave of her hand. The thought of food sickened her. Her stomach had been a knot of anxiety for days, rejecting even the simplest broth. But then a thought, cold and insidious, snaked its way into her mind. Was it poisoned? A quiet, convenient death, saving the king the trouble of a public spectacle. The thought almost made her smile, a bitter, humorless twist of her lips. "If so, let it be quick." "Leave it," Anne said, her voice surprisingly steady. "I have no appetite." Lady Kingston hesitated, then placed the dish on a small table near the bed. Her eyes briefly met Anne's, and for a fleeting moment, Anne thought she saw something there. Pity? Regret? It vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by the familiar blankness. "As you wish, Your Majesty," Lady Kingston murmured, then turned to leave. But just as she reached the door, another figure emerged from the shadows of the corridor. It was Sir William Kingston himself, Constable of the Tower, a man known for his grim efficiency and unwavering loyalty to the crown. His presence always heralded ill tidings. He was a sturdy, forbidding man, with eyes that seemed to hold all, the secrets of the tower within their depths. He never smiled. He simply existed, a grim reaper in velvet and steel. Anne felt a fresh wave of terror. This was it. This was not about supper. Sir William's gaze was fixed on her, unwavering as he stepped fully into the room. He carried nothing in his hands, no scroll, no warrant, yet his very presence felt like a death sentence delivered. Lady Kingston curtsied deeply, then slipped out, closing the door softly behind her. The click of the latch echoed like a pistol shot in the silence. Anne straightened her spine, forcing a semblance of her old regal posture. She would not cower. Not before him, not before anyone. She met his gaze, her heart hammering against her, ribs daring him to speak, to deliver the blow she knew was coming. Sir William Kingston's voice, when it came, was surprisingly soft, almost gentle, which only amplified its chilling effect. "Your Majesty," he began, his eyes never leaving hers, "a message has come from the King's Council." Anne held her breath, her knuckles white as she gripped the windowsill. This was it. The pronouncement, the date, the end. But what, sir? William said next was not a date. It was far more insidious, far more terrifying. "They wish to know, Your Majesty, if you would confess your sins before God, for the sake of your soul, and that of your daughter, the Lady Elizabeth." The words struck Anne like a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs. Confess? Confess to crimes she had not committed? And to implicate Elizabeth? The sheer audacity, the cold calculation of it was breathtaking. It was a snare, a final cruel trap designed to ensnare her, to validate their monstrous lies, and, perhaps, to strip her beloved child of any claim to legitimacy, sealing her own fate with her mother's confession. The blood drained from Anne's face, leaving her ashen. This was worse than any execution. This was a demand for her soul. This was not merely about her death. It was about the utter annihilation of her legacy and the damning of her daughter. The taste of bile rose in Anne's throat, sharp and bitter, mirroring the corrosive despair that gnawed at her spirit. The proposition hung in the air, heavier than the very stones of the tower, a poisonous fume threatening to suffocate her. Last vestiges of hope. Confess. Confess to the monstrous catalogue of sins they had concocted, sins that twisted her very being into something foul and unrecognizable. And for what? For her soul, they claimed. For her daughter, Elizabeth. The words were a cruel mockery, a velvet glove disguising a fist of iron. She knew with a certainty that pierced through the haze of terror that a confession would not save her soul, but condemn it to eternal falsehood. Nor would it truly protect Elizabeth. A mother's confessed guilt would forever taint the daughter, branding her with the mark of illegitimacy, perhaps even treason by association. They sought not merely her death, but her absolute annihilation, a complete erasure of her reign, her marriage, and all she had ever been. Her eyes, wide and fixed on Sir William Kingston, searched for any flicker of compassion, any hint of humanity in his unyielding gaze. There was none. Only the cold, unwavering resolve of a man performing his duty, a silent instrument of the king's will. He was the executioner, not of her body, but of her spirit, tasked with breaking her before the final blow. Confess? Anne's voice emerged as a strangled whisper, barely audible in the oppressive silence. She cleared her throat, forcing strength into her words. Confess what, Sir William, that I am a whore, an adulteress, an incestuous monster? Her voice gained a bitter edge, each word a venomous dart aimed at the heart of their lies. That I betrayed the king who raised me to such heights? Do you believe these slanders, Sir William? Do you truly believe them? Kingston remained unmoving, his face a granite mask. My lady, he said, his tone still unnervingly calm. It is not for me to believe or disbelieve. I am but a servant of the king's will. The council sends this message. They offer you this opportunity. The word opportunity hung in the air, laden with chilling irony. Opportunity? Anne laughed, a harsh, brittle sound that echoed unnaturally in the confined space. It was a laugh born of hysteria and profound bitterness. An opportunity to damn myself and my child? To be forever remembered as the monstrous queen, the seductress who ensnared a king, only to fall from grace through her own depravity? Her voice rose, edged with raw pain and indignation. No, I will not lie. I will not betray my God, nor my daughter by confessing to crimes I did not commit. A flicker, almost imperceptible, crossed Kingston's face, perhaps of surprise, perhaps of a momentary recognition of the Queen's unyielding spirit. But it was gone as quickly as it came. His jaw tightened. The king, your majesty, is a merciful man. A confession made before God might ease your passage, and it might— He paused, his gaze dropping to the floor for a moment before rising, again to meet hers. It might sway him towards leniency for others. The unspoken threat hung heavy in the air. Others. Her brother George, Sir Henry Norris, Mark Smeaton. The men condemned alongside her, whose lives now hung by a thread that, Kingston implied, she held in her hand. This was the true cruelty of their bargain. Not just her own soul, but the souls of those she loved, held hostage to her silence, her defiance. A terrible agony twisted in her gut. Could she truly sacrifice them for her own stubborn pride, her refusal to be stained by their lies? She thought of George, her brilliant, witty brother, her closest confidant, who had stood by her through every triumph and every tribulation. To know that his fate, and the fates of those loyal gentlemen, might be sealed by her refusal, thought was unbearable. It was a torment designed to break even the strongest will, a moral quicksand that threatened to drag her down into a despair deeper than any dungeon. Leniency? Anne repeated, her voice hoarse, her eyes burning with unshed tears. What leniency, Sir William? Their lives? Or merely a swifter, less painful death? The cynicism was a shield against the crushing weight of their manipulation. She knew the king. His mercy was a fickle thing, granted or withheld based on his own convenience, his own self-serving narratives. Kingston sighed, a long, weary sound that hinted at the burdens he carried. That, your majesty, is for the king to decide. But a confession, a true and humble confession, would show penitence. It would allow him to divorce you in the eyes of God and man and proceed with his plans with a clear conscience. The true motive, bald and ugly, lay exposed. It was not her soul they cared for, nor Elizabeth's future. It was Henry's conscience, his perceived divine right to another wife, another son, another chance. Her death was merely a necessary clearing of the path. This realization, stark and brutal, hardened something within Anne. They wanted her to be complicit in her own destruction, to legitimate their monstrous slander, to make their injustice palatable to God and man. His conscience? Anne scoffed, a bitter smile twisting her lips. His conscience is as clear as a swamp, Sir William. It shifts with every tide of his desire. He speaks of God but acts like a tyrant. He speaks of justice but condemns the innocent. And he asks me to confess, not for salvation but for his convenience, so he may rid himself of me without further stain on his royal reputation. She turned away from him, walking to the window again, her hands clasped tightly behind her back, the cold stone pressed against her palms, grounding her in the harsh reality of her confinement. The world outside, gray and indifferent, offered no comfort, no escape. No, she whispered, the word gaining strength as she repeated it, a defiant mantra against the encroaching darkness. No, I will not confess. I will not profane my soul with lies, nor damn my child with a false confession. If I must die, I will die innocent. My truth, Sir William, will be my only legacy, and a just God will know the truth, even if earthly kings do not. Kingston remained silent for a long moment, his presence a heavy weight in the small room. Anne could feel his gaze upon her back, a silent assessment. She knew this was not the answer they desired, the answer that would make their task easier, their narrative cleaner. They wanted a submissive victim, a repentant sinner, not a defiant queen clinging to her innocence. Finally, he spoke, his voice lower now, almost a murmur, as if sharing a secret. Your Majesty, consider the alternative. A trial, perhaps, where your alleged actions are laid bare before the court, where every detail, every whisper is dissected and judged. Imagine the shame, not just for you, but for your house, your family, and for the Lady Elizabeth. The chilling implication was clear, a public spectacle, a drawn-out agony of humiliation, not merely death. And the threat to Elizabeth was repeated, a cruel twist of the knife. Anne closed her eyes, picturing the courtroom, the snickering lords, the prejudiced judges, the venomous testimony of Cromwell's creatures. It would be a farce, a theatrical condemnation designed to further blacken her name and strip her of any remaining dignity. The thought of it, of her reputation being shredded by lies in front of a mocking crowd, was almost as terrifying as the execution itself. But then another image rose to her mind's eye. Elizabeth's face, small and earnest, her bright eyes, filled with adoration. Anne had sworn to protect that child, to give her a future. What kind of future would it be if her mother confessed to such heinous crimes? Would Elizabeth not carry that burden, that shame, her entire life? No. She had to be strong for Elizabeth, for herself, for the truth. She turned back to Kingston. Her eyes, though shadowed with exhaustion and despair, now held a fierce, unyielding light. "Let them try me, then," she declared, her voice ringing with newfound resolve. "Let them lay bare their lies before God and man. I will face their accusations with my head held high, for I know my innocence. And God, I pray, will be my witness. If my death is to be a spectacle, let it be a testament to their injustice, not to my invented depravity." Kingston simply nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. The silence stretched again, a taut wire between them. He had offered his poisoned chalice, and she had refused. The negotiation was over. Now only the inevitable remained. "As you wish, Your Majesty," he said, his voice devoid of emotion, a mere formality. He turned, his heavy boots echoing on the stone floor as he moved towards the door. The sound of his departure was chillingly final. Anne stood motionless, watching the door close, the faint click of the latch once more sealing her fate. The room felt colder, emptier than before. She had refused the unholy bargain, chosen truth, over a false peace, dignity over desperate futile pleas. But what would be the cost? The gnawing dread returned, intensified by the knowledge that her defiance would surely invite further cruelties. The king would not be pleased. He demanded absolute submission, and she had given him none. She walked to the small table where Lady Kingston had left the covered dish. She lifted the lid. Inside, cold and unappetizing, lay a piece of roasted fowl and some bread. It looked unblemished, certainly not poisoned. But the thought of eating still repulsed her. She pushed it away,